Welcome to Ripstop on the Record, the podcast for makers, by makers, where we talk about all things MYOG. Brought to you by Ripstop by the Roll. I think it's good, right?
Yeah, I think that was a good take.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in space and time, everybody. Welcome to Ripstop on the Record. I am Jameson.
And I'm Avery.
In this episode, we are going behind the scenes with Rob. He is the training manager at Zpacks. If you don't know, Zpacks makes all of their gear at their shop in West Melbourne, Florida, right here in the USA. So, which that means is they make their tents and shelters, backpacks, accessories, all that stuff with people sewing all those things in their shop in Florida. As you can imagine, this is a massive undertaking and presents a lot of challenges. The one that Rob is tasked to solve is teaching people how to sew and how to make those pieces of gear. So that's what we'll be talking with Rob about today, how they train their people, what their trail map looks like, what sort of production requirements there are, and all sorts of things like that.
Yeah, and whether you're an advanced sewer or a newbie, there's something in this episode for everyone, and you might even learn a fun analogy or two.
He was the king of analogies and metaphors. Rob is awesome. The big announcement for us this week is that episode 100 is coming up. It still is sort of hard to believe. This is episode 99, so just here in 2 weeks, we're going to be releasing episode 100. Now, as a little celebration for episode 100, we're doing something pretty cool. We are asking for you to share your MYOG stories. So tell us about the fails, the catastrophes, the problems, or funny stories that you have from your sewing table. We just want funny ones. We want good ones. Hit us with any stories that you got, because I know if you've been sewing, you've got some good ones.
Yeah, and at this point, we just want anyone's. We want any MYOG fail story. Send in your story to social@ripstopbytheroll.com. You can message it to us on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok. You can send us a voice message. You can send a carrier pigeon, whatever you like. We just want to hear your story. So be sure to share that with us to be featured on episode 100.
If you're thinking right now, you're like, they don't want to hear my story. I'm telling you, I do want to hear it, because I'm going to have to share mine on the podcast, and Avery will probably share one of hers, and we're going to have a couple friends of the pod. I think Matt from Red Pod and Francesca are going to be on. They're going to share some of theirs. We do want to hear your story. I'm sure it is as good as it happened in real life. I'm sure you're going to tell it even better. So please let us know. We want to hear about it. Last thing, happy 4th of July, everybody. I think everyone should be out traveling, hanging about. Maybe if you're lucky, you're getting to sew something or not getting sunburned. So thanks for listening to us over this holiday weekend. Hope you have a great time hanging out. And as always, please like, comment, rate, subscribe, review. Let us know whatever you need to do to let other people know about this podcast. If you like it, it helps other people that are interested in making find us. And it helps us know that we should continue to do this.
Awesome. Let's get to the episode.
Hey, Rob, thanks for sharing some time with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So I actually only sort of know your title, and I was going to ask this for the listeners anyway, so this will be helpful for everybody. Tell us about what you do at Zpacks.
Okay, my title is training manager. So my primary responsibility is training the sewing machine operators to build our products from the minute they walk in the door till they graduate our trainee trail map, which we may talk about in a little bit. I also do corporate training. I do management training. I coach others that aren't sewing machine operators, but my primary responsibility is training people how to sew.
So that's a great place to start the conversation, and we're excited to get into more about Zpacks and sewing. So how did you learn how to sew?
Try to make it kind of short. Growing up, my mom sewed. There was a couple sewing machines in the house, bobbins all over the place and thread, and she sewed all the time. And she would drag. I have a twin sister. Drag us out to fabric stores, right? And to us, when we were that age, it was boring. The fabric of this, we'd play around, and I never really got into it. I can't even remember if she ever put me on the machine just to try it out. Almost 5 years ago now, there was a employment opportunity for a trainer. I've done training in a lot of my past job roles, but I've never trained people how to sew. So I took a stab at it, and they liked me. I went through I think it was a 3-part interview process, and here I am at Zpacks 5 years later, training people how to sew. But I did not sew before I came to Zpacks, and I only told that pre-story because I think back to myself and I said, man, I had every opportunity in the world to jump on a sewing machine because my mom sewed my whole life, and I didn't do it. And I always tell people I'd love to sit her down and me down and go into a room and have kind of a sew off with mom and see who could out sew who.
So did you start out, would you say you started out as an MYOG, or did you kind of start out in the more industrial space? What were some of your early sewing projects?
Definitely industrial. I came in and just straight ahead, let's make products as fast as we can, right? Let's pump them out. That was the beginning.
Do you remember the first thing that you ever personally made?
Dry bag.
Was that at Zpacks, or was that
Oh,
beforehand?
it was at Zpacks, and I was new to the company, and we were sewing dry bags. That was the first thing you had to learn. That's when we used to sew the Velcro on the top, and you had to line up the presser foot on the inside of the right and left toe to sew the Velcro on. And I think about 3 days in, I said, I can't do this. I can't believe I've taken this job to teach people how to sew, and I can't even do it. And I got really, really frustrated because it's not easy, but I stuck with it. And that's the neat part about the job is I started out not knowing how to sew. So I know exactly how my trainees feel when they come in.
I'm really curious about that dichotomy. Maybe is the right word. Maybe it's not. But you were so it seems like you got hired at Zpacks because you had great proficiency in training and helping teach, but not necessarily in sewing. Talk me through that a little bit more, like how your training and kind of coaching mindset works, but then also how you landed this sewing centric job without knowing how to sew, which is kind of awesome.
Well, like a lot of positions, again, I'll just a quick little anecdote. When I was in high school, I had and this isn't to say I can hold my own. I'm good at sewing, but just an anecdote. I was on the wrestling team, and rumor had it that the our wrestling coach was no good at wrestling. He couldn't wrestle, but he could coach to wrestle, right? And he was a really great coach. So when I first came into the company, in my first couple training classes, some of these trainees were right up to speed with me or doing better than me. So really what it came down to is I think that they saw this guy can coach. You don't have to be an expert to coach, right? So I think that's first and foremost. You've got to have that training mindset and then go from there. You don't actually have to be the best because wow, I'd like to say I just got through doing some training on a lot of our veteran sewing machine operators here, and it's so fun to sit down with them a few years later and watch them out sew you. You know, it's great. But I'm there to say, hey, this is a better technique, or why don't you try it this way, or keep it up. You know, you're almost there at the next goal to make the next band or whatnot.
So you started to segue already, and I want to start to push segue even more from kind of learning about you to talking about the sewing program and course at Zpacks. There's a lot of questions I want to go with, so I guess I'll just start with this one and let us roll from there. But what are some of the challenges that come with this production style? You are making everything in house, and you have to train people to make those things at a certain quality level that you feel comfortable sending out. That's a huge challenge in of itself. But what are maybe some of the ones that people don't foresee?
Here's a good one. So, and again, maybe it's a little off, but not really. We have people that come in, I would say, I don't know, maybe it's a 50-50 or 60-40, where people come in with absolutely no experience, and then the people come in with experience. So I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's a little more challenging for the ones that have experience and the ones that have a lot of experience to adapt to our way of doing things. And production sewing. A lot of people come in with experience, but they've never done production sewing. So that's one aspect of my job that can be challenging. Sometimes they say, well, there's a better way to do this, or we should do it this way. And I have to say, well, I understand, but this is the way we do it. So that's a pretty big challenge is the ones that actually have experience or a lot of experience. I've had trainees that have worked, owned their own shops, where they did alterations or whatnot, or they worked at a bridal shop and sewed wedding dresses, and their skill level is, I don't want to say way, but yeah, way up above what I know. But I know Zpacks and I know our way, and to get them to adapt to our way is a pretty big challenge.
So let's start getting into the sewing course. You called it the sewing trail
Oh
map.
yeah,
Was that right?
yeah, and that took
Awesome.
took a while to develop. As I said earlier, when I first came in, it was go 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 go, just pump it out, pump it out, pump it out, and as time went on, I got to see, and well, my director got to see that early on, maybe that's just not the way to go, right? You need to be able to make a quality product that we can sell. That's number one. So that's where we start out. It's a 6-month trainee trail map, and it's pretty cool. It's the Zpacks logo right up here, and it starts here
I love
and
it.
it keeps going up. And each month you get a new badge, kind of like a board game, and there's
Yeah.
different goals you have to hit along the way till you'll finally get to the peak. And each trail, we have the foundation trail, and then we go up, and then we finally have the triple crown is up here. But the goals are set in a manner where it's the most effective. So without going too far into it, we have the first badge is you make an order of a product of ours and you do it with no mistakes. Boom, first badge. You then, after you spend 4 weeks with me, and we can get more into that in a little bit, but after you spend your 4 weeks with me, you go to a department, right? Whether it's shelters, quilts, clothing, backpacks, and that's what you're going to specialize in. And I with the help of others, kind of determine where we think you're best suited. But you go to your department and then you make a department order. No flaws, right? Top quality. You get your next badge. Then we start getting into the productivity. Next badge, badge number 3, would be a productivity goal. And badge number 4, another productivity goal plus a new product. So you get a certain productivity plus you learn a new product. So by the time you're done with the trail map, you can sew well, good quality, and you're productive, and you know at least 3 or 4 of our products. And it's a 6-month trail map. I've done the math. Most people can do it in a little over 4 months.
So I'm curious about, I want to, that was a really good overview, but I want to get more, hone in on the specific parts a little bit more.
Sure.
Talk us through the foundation. So that's like the basis. Those are, I think you said the first 4 weeks of somebody. What does that look like? What do they learn? What do they do?
Okay. You come in. Before you come in, there's an interview. You have an interview, and then you have an assessment with me. And that's where I sit you down at a machine, whether you've sewn before or not. And that's a little tricky for people. Sometimes they go to an interview, and then you sit them down, and there's a sewing machine in front of them, and they say, what's going on? So it's my job to calm their nerves and say, okay, we're just going to do this, and it's very easy. I'm going to coach you through this, and I have them make a variety of stitches. What I'm looking for is not that you can do it. Of course, you need to be able to make the stitches, reasonably well, but are you coachable? Can I train you? Are you distracted? Are you following directions, right? Because I do it once, then you do it. Then I do it again, and then you do it. So I look for, do you catch on? Are you, and I try to make a pretty good determination on, can I teach this person the skill of sewing? From there, you get hired on if you pass the assessment. And you come in, first day is, believe it or not, book training. Nobody likes it. I created a training manual. It's about 32 pages. And again, I tell them all, they get nervous. I say, you don't have to learn all this and to memory. It's just I want to go over all this, and we spend about half a day, maybe a little bit more, going over the policies, the basics of the sewing machine and whatnot. And then we hit the machines. When we hit the machines, when you first hit the machines, it's called fabric fun. I am the collector of the scrap fabric here, and I cut up swatches of all the various types of fabric that we have, and I say for the rest of the day, have fun, huh? No, that's what I want you to do. Some have experience, some don't. I want you to feel the textures. I want you to kind of get used to it. Try to sew your initials. Try to make a little bag. I don't care what you do, just have fun. It's called fabric fun. After that, I have a trainee called a trainee punch card. So it's a card, and I got a little funny cartoon little character on it, and I take you through some simple sewing techniques, procedures, and the products get a little bit harder as you go. So I start off with the fabric fun, and then we do picture tracing, and it's your choice. I have pictures that from the free coloring pages, and I print them up on cardstock. And I make all the lines red so that when you're sewing, we use black thread, you can see your progress. And they think a lot of them, it's funny, as I start getting into it, they think, what are we doing here? Right? I have rainbows, I have unicorns, I have an evil clown, and some understand it, some don't. And I say, it's definitely, it's going to help you lift the foot, turn. It's like driving a stick shift, right? That's what I tell them. You've got your reverse lever, you have your pedal, you have the pressure foot lifter, and it's all getting into sync. But we don't want to put you on real product just yet, right? We want to kind of hone in. So they think that's really fun. And then we go to a couple of cardstock sheets with all of our famous stitches, right? We've got the, and again, we may have a different term than what other people use, but the X box, the X stitch, which they like to call the hourglass, the Y, which you use on pockets, of course. We do some running stitches, and they do that, and they have to do 2 of them, and they get kind of bored at that point, right? They say, oh man, we got to keep doing all these. Oh, and the Z stitch, right? The ever popular Z stitch. And I said, think of it like Miyagi, right? Danielson has to wash the windows, right? And he waxes the car, and finally he gets upset, just like you. And he says, why are we doing all this? And then, of course, Miyagi shows him. And I said, when I throw real product at you and you know how to do all these stitches, you're going to thank me. After that, we do what I like to call baby ground sheets, where you do your top stitch and you do a double folded hem. Some call it a double rolled hem. And then we do, I used to call them fake stuff sacks and fake dry bags. And they still call them fake, so I call them imitation stuff sacks, imitation dry bags that we make out of scrap. And then I guess it's kind of up to me to determine, are you ready for real product yet? And then you get your first real work order if I feel like you've done well. And that can go on for about the trainee punch card. Each time you complete one of the techniques or imitation work orders, I come around with a hole punch, and I punch the card. And that alone makes them feel good. And it's funny sometimes because they'll look in front of them and they'll look behind them and they'll say, oh my God, I'm so many punches behind. And I tell them, you're all going to be in the same place after the 4 weeks. Some people have experience, some don't. That's another one of those challenges when they're looking around at the person in front of them, behind them, that have been sewing for 7 to 10 years or maybe longer, and they feel like they're falling behind. So then, you get your real product. And then somewhere in there, usually during the second week, we like to do a machine, what was it, like presentation. So I get with our maintenance guy, who's much more than a maintenance guy or man, Alan, and we have a presentation. I like to call it, after Pink Floyd, "Welcome to the Machine," I call it, and that song plays as they come in, and we go through tension, how to replace your needle, common issues you have with the machine, a variety of machine related things. But we don't do that usually till about the second week, because we don't want to fill your head with too much. I like to tell them, because again, here I keep going with the challenges. Everybody wants to be the best at something immediately, right? Nobody wants to wait. And that's a huge challenge for me. That's probably a better example than my first one. And I say, listen, and I'm I warn you, I'm the king of bad analogies, but it's like if you go, I tell them all the time, it's like you get hired by a pizza shop, right? And you go into the pizza shop and they say, you're going to be the new pizza box builder. So you get trained on how to build a pizza box. And by the end of the day, you're a professional, right? You're great at pizza box building. I said, this is nothing like that. I said, you're going to get frustrated with yourself. You're going to look in front of you, you're going to look behind you, and you're going to say, I just can't do this, because that's what I did. I said, but in just a few months' time, you're going to be laughing at your past self. And that's what I was doing. I laughed at my past self and I said, oh my God, I can't believe I got that upset. Look at how well I'm doing now. I can sew a dry bag in, just a few minutes, well, we don't have Velcro on them anymore, but it was no problem. So that's kind of squeezed in between all that is the different personalities, the ones that just throw up their hands. We have some here, we have employees here that first week of training, they threw up their hands. I don't think I can do this. They're now supervising a department. And that's what I love to see. I'll continue on. So after you get your first real product, we start introducing the small stuff, right? Stuff sacks, dry bags, maybe some belt pouches. We're not going to put you on a backpack or a shelter just yet, right? And I like to just gauge and just see where you're at. Are you good at that? Because that's another one of those things I should have said too when I do my assessments. I'm looking for attention to detail. That's what I'm really looking for. One of the major things I'm looking for is attention to detail. So do you have just that amazing attention to detail with like really small type stuff, and then maybe backpacks, right? Maybe I get a hunch that, wow, they're really good at long straight stitches. Let's send them over to shelters, or maybe quilts would be good for them. So I start eyeing it out. Supervisors that I work with closely, they'll come over, they'll look at some of the product, and they'll examine it too, and then we make a decision on where we want to place you. And then when you go to your department, you're still on the trainee trail map. I'm usually there walking you through the product that you're going to learn in your department, and I'm there until the end of the trainee trail map. When you graduate.
I have an observation and a question, and that was really cool. You got me thinking about a lot of things because of how extensive this process is, and it's very easy, I think, for those of us that make gear at home to imagine what it would be like to learn how to sew within a structure. I think most people that learn how to sew, it's extremely unstructured, which is part of the fun, but also part of the peril is that you're also just raw dog in the process. No, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to try to make this thing. I don't even know what stitch I need to use. Yeah, it's very easy for me to kind of picture the phases that I learned to sew with some of these phases that you're talking about. My observation first is that I find it really, really interesting and really cool how you use both fun and kind of psychology in your training process. You make it interesting and engaging with doing pictures, just having fun, like this exploration style, not just like, hey, learn these things and regurgitate them, but also how you there's a lot of intentionality behind how you are framing the situation so that they're in the best headspace, which I think is really cool from you. And I would imagine psychologically that makes a lot of sense. I think people probably respond better when they feel more receptive and they feel less pressure than if you're just like, do this or else.
Right. Right.
The question, and you kind of started to touch on it with talking about the attention to detail, but I was going to ask, what attributes do you most commonly see in people that become proficient sewers? And if you had a funny or a good story about someone in particular, you don't have to name a name, just about someone learning to sew and kind of what attributes they possessed or they showed you.
Okay, so I love when people come in for the assessment before they get hired, and it's weird. I always say this, and they tell me that they're into some sort of art, right? I I I draw, I paint, I sculpt. I've even had I sing, and somehow they always seem to do well. I don't know if it's a, I don't know, left brain, right brain thing or whatnot, but they seem to do well. I float my own boat. I'm kind of a handy guy before I came to Zpacks, or even now. I would build stuff out of wood or whatnot, where you had to be very precise with measurements and whatnot. People like that seem to excel as well. I'd like to also say, and this is maybe a little on or off, is you do have some people that come in and they have a lot of experience, right? And we're talking about DIY, and they're at their house and they sew, right? And that's one of those things where you say, okay, well, you have experience, but this is production sewing, right? This isn't sit down when you feel like it. And so this is you have goals to reach. So I have people that come in sometimes with a lot of experience, but then when it comes to the productivity side, they're just not, they just can't hit the numbers, or it takes them a little bit. They still graduate the trail map, but they're still wondering, wow, how did this person that didn't even know how to sew when they came in ahead of me? And I use the analogy, another one of my analogies. We're about, I think about an hour and 15 minutes south of Daytona, right? So I tell them, I said, so I drive, right? I've been driving, don't want to date myself, for a long time, right? 25, 30 years. And I drive to work, and I drive to Orlando sometimes and whatnot. And I go up to the Daytona 500 Speedway and I say, listen, I want in on that next race. And they said, well, who are you? Well, I'm Rob, and I drive a car all day. Not all day, but I drive it every day. I go here, I go there. Sometimes I go down to Miami. I come back. I'm on the highway. I could turn pretty good. And they say, whoa, 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 whoa. This is totally different. This is much different than that. You've got to be trained on how to do this. There's safety related stuff. There's this, that, the other thing. You can't just jump on the Daytona 500 up against these NASCAR champions, right? And I know it's a little bit of overkill, but sometimes it's kind of the same thing. I mean, when you're at your house and you say, okay, yeah, I think after dinner I'll do this, and after this I'll do this, and sometimes people come in and maybe underestimate. They think, well, I've got the experience, so I should do well at this. But here we put them both together, which is a challenge for some people. And then again, I've got a lot over the 5 years I've been here, but one of my favorites, and this really comes down to, do you have a trainer mentality? Can you be a coach? Takes a lot of patience. I always say too, and they all laugh. A lot of times you've got to be able to go, okay, let's continue on, right? And kind of swallow a little. But this was very different, and this is one I use with some of my trainers as well. Is I had a trainee come in. They did the assessment. They did really well, and it was the first day, and we were doing fabric fun. And I said, okay. And they said, well, how do you go, and I want to do my initials or whatnot. I can't remember exactly. And I said, okay, well, go ahead and start sewing forward. So they hit the reverse lever and they start sewing. And I said, no, forward. And they went, yeah, okay. Go backward then. Go backward. So they let their hand off the reverse lever, and then they start sewing. And immediately, even with the patience I have, I was like, you got to be kidding me, right? You've got to be kidding me. I just told you that's a reverse lever. I told you all about the machine, and you're doing completely opposite. And then I stopped, and I looked at the fabric when they were doing it, and I said, oh my goodness, I've never thought of this before. This is 3.5, 4 years in. When you're holding down the reverse lever, which way is the fabric going? Toward you. Forward. That was forward to them. And then when you let go of the reverse lever, the fabric goes backward, right? And I said, oh my God, they're exactly right. They're exactly right. I'm wrong because I didn't train them that in depth, right? It was just kind of funny.
That's something that I would have never thought about. Yeah. I was thinking too, when you were telling the story, that they were showing the whole project in I mean, essentially in reverse. Just reminds me of like hitting the go-kart with the reverse on.
Right.
Yeah. So I have a question about how people get assigned to specific items. Like you said, it might be because they're really good at doing long stitches, or do they also have kind of a say in that? And then how are you training them for that specific product?
Sure. So again, I look and see what they're doing in training, and I determine, okay, where I think they'd be good to go. One thing I do want to note, which I have to say a lot before I continue on, is some of them, sometimes you don't get to decide what you're going to sew, right? So we hand out work, and you get something that you don't prefer, right? Everybody has their favorites.
Yeah.
Everybody has stuff that's fun, and I always like to tell them, I said, listen, I'm not telling you what to sew, right? The supervisors aren't telling what to sew, right up the chain. You know who tells us what to sew? Customers, right? Because they're the ones ordering the products. If we have a sale on belt pouches, well, we're going to have to make a lot of belt pouches. You might like them a lot and you get a lot of belt pouches. Well, the belt pouch sale is over and now we have dry bags. You don't like dry bags. I'm sorry, but that's not me, right? We're all here to satisfy the customer.
Right.
That's our job. But getting into a little bit more is, yes, you do really want to, if somebody's really good at backpack backs, right? And that's their bread and butter and they're good at it, then yeah, maybe, you put them on backpack backs, right? I will say too, though, we do like to have you be able to make, even within your department, say backpacks or shelters, um, be able to make as many products in that department as possible, right? So people have their favorites and then the ones they don't really like, but at the same time, there is an incentive to knowing more products as well. So that helps all around, really. That makes the SMOs, sewing machine operators, that's our acronym, want to learn more. But yes, so they would get into the department and they would learn Plex Solo doors, right? And that's what they're on. And their goal is to make an order of Plex Solo doors with no errors, and then they get their second badge. So yeah, I will say we're not going to put them on another product until we can get those Plex Solo doors down. I will say this though, if they just can't get those Plex Solo doors down for some reason, I'm going to work with them, line lead's going to work with them, supervisor's going to work with them best of our ability, then we'll just put them on a different product. And actually, I should say too is, and this might be an answer to one of the earlier questions that I kind of missed, is if if we send you to a department and that's just not a good fit for you, I always tell them, let me know, let your supervisor know, let your line lead know. I mean, when you're over in quilts and you're sewing Ventum, right? And you're trying to get that exactly straight. I mean, that's a whole different animal than, say, our new Ultra fabric or even some thick Dyneema, right? Because at least the Dyneema is going to hold a fold, right? So if you go over to quilts and it's just not your thing, and maybe you're not even making errors, but it's just not your thing, let someone know. I've done that quite a few times. So we say, okay, well, you're not a good fit there. You've determined that you're not a good fit there. That's fine. Let's send you over to shelters. And then they exceed and they do really well in shelters. I say, but listen, we can't make it like Epcot where you visit all the departments. I'd love to be able to do that, but you've got to go somewhere. But I mean, if you're not comfortable with one and then you go to another, that's fine. We can do that. We've done that. Maybe a third, but yeah, at some point, again, you have to draw the line and say it's, basically the job is the job. You're a sewing machine operator. But yeah, definitely don't, I want to say, like, pigeonhole them and just put them in an apartment, say, if you can't do that, then that's it. Oh no. So they're on that first product. And once they can do that really well, they'll stay on it because, I mean, let's keep going. And then I usually wait until they're comfortable and then try to introduce another product that's similar, right? It may not be shelter doors, but maybe a ground sheet, right? Maybe you're doing a top stitch, which you would do on the shelter doors, and you're doing a double folded hem. So you've already know those techniques. You've already kind of mastered them. So let's try that now. So I try to make it kind of related.
Rob, you kind of read my mind with my next question there because you're talking about materials. You all work with anything from like 50 DCF, Ultra 100, Ultra 200, maybe. I mean, these thicker pack materials, all the way down to ultralight quilt materials and ultralight shelter materials. Do you do anything specific to help train people on how to handle different materials?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a variety of techniques depending on the fabric that you're working with. When you're working with the Ventum, um, you, for the most part, I mean, everybody has their thing, but when training it, and you definitely want to have a hand behind. So when I'm training ultra DCF, I always say, it's funny, I say you want to have one hand and you're gripping the fabric. And I kind of just use a little technique where I kind of just grab it, just enough tension, and you're letting the machine do the work, right? Don't rage against the machine. I always tell them, I said, listen, because I did that. I raged against the machine at first, but the machine is metal, right? It got no brain, right? It's just going to do what it's going to do. You need to work with it, not against it. So keep your hand just like that. And then you have, depending on how big the fabric is, and as you probably can assume when you're doing shelter bodies or whatnot, you need two hands. Try to keep, I call it like Batman and Robin, right? This is your leading hand, right? There's Batman. And this is just there to help you along, right? So you want this one in line with this hand, try to do, or behind it, right? Because if you start putting a hand in front, well, that's when this hand can get kind of caught and then your fabric kind of twists on you, right? So I always tell them, I said, you want this hand here, and then you want, I go like this and I say, your serving hand, right? Your, your serving hand. This is your main one, right? The maitre d' maybe. There's your serving hand, right? And I say, hors d'oeuvre, where's your serving hand? But when you're working with Ventum, it's very different. You want this hand here, and you want this hand actually behind it. Because if you have your hand here, that Ventum is just going to bunch up behind your presser foot, and it's going to cause ridges. So it's kind of like a timed thing where you have to have this one timed exactly with this one as you're going along. And that's probably one of the major ones, but there's obviously many more.
I like your analogies, Rob. I like how you paint these pictures with different scenarios to help clear something up. So I like that, especially with that one. I mean, the lightweight fabric question or the lightweight fabric frustration is one that we get asked a lot. I bought this quilt material and it just keeps bunching up and I don't know what to do about it. So I like hearing kind of how you teach that to people. Yeah, I don't remember my follow-up question, but I appreciate that. I appreciate how you how you shape these examples and shape these things in the mind. That's really cool. I think what I was going to say was or just ask about the next step. So after they get a specific product, they start to do that. I think you mentioned early on that they start to hit a productivity number. Can you tell us a little bit, without going into detail, about your whole production system and metrics and whatnot? But what does that look like on the sewing side? Like, are they doing they're doing a door panel within an hour? Like, what does that look like? What's that part of the training process?
Sure. So, we obviously have, certain amounts of time that are set to build a certain product, right? And then a lot of our products are not built by the same sewing machine operator, right? One might sew doors, the other one will do the floor, the other one will do the body, somebody else will do the screen doors, and then we have a final assembly, and that's all timed and that's put into numbers where there is a goal to complete one, right? But obviously, not everybody can hit that exact number, right? So the whole structure is set up with that, shall we say, that magic number, right? And then some are over that and some are under that. If you're under the magic number, oh, so you're under the magic number. I mean, you're still here. I can say that, I can say that the when you graduate the trainee trail map, you're not at that number, but you've proven to us that you can put your head down and you have the willingness and desire to succeed. That's what we like to say. If you have the willingness and desire to succeed, we're going to get you there. But we have a whole, there's a pretty big spectrum of, speed of course. Some, so under the magic number, if you will, and some are over the magic number, and we just want you to be within a specific range. And it's not, hmm, I don't know how to put it. If you have the willingness and desires to succeed, and you come in here, and we use the term "put your head down," right? And so it's not put your head down. And so, I mean, you're kind of your own boss. You walk in, you are given work orders to work on, and then you get them done. There's nobody. I mean, there's plenty of help. There's me and the line leads and supervisors always there to help you through anything, or I don't care if it's it's a payroll issue or you're having trouble putting a buckle on. We're there to help you, but we're not there walking around, faster, do this. I can't believe you've only done that. Just doesn't go on here. So when I tell people and we're doing the assessment, we give them a tour of the facility and we show them this is this is not a real high pressure, get it done and this and that. You do what you have to do. So that, I will say, that's another thing we're looking for. Can you work autonomously, right? Can you set your own goals? Because then when you're off the trainee trail map, I mean, it's up to you now. We've released you into the wild, more or less, right? And you've got to be able to sustain that. So that's something I'm looking for, is somebody that doesn't need somebody on their back the whole time that they're here saying, hey, this and hey, that. So yeah, put your head down. And so really just means, do you have the discipline to set your own goals and say, okay, I've got 3 work orders in my bin and I want to get those 3 done by the end of the shift. And that way I'll be pretty good.
Can you tell us what the hardest product or maybe hardest step is along the process for any of your products? Like, what would be, you mentioned, one person might be making the doors, someone might be doing final assembly. So I don't want to say like the hardest product because some products might have more steps than others, but what might be the hardest step, or I guess just the hardest product in general?
Okay, so it's going to be curves and zippers that go on curves.
Fair, touche.
Oh yeah, yep. That still gets me sometimes. And it's not just sewing the zipper onto the curve. Is it going to match up when I'm done? Is that zip pocket
Mm.
when I get through? There's a lot of variables, and that's the thing too. Obviously we have work instructions and written procedures, and then there's always me to follow up with my songs and dance and all these analogies and whatnot. But there's finesse involved. There's your own creativity on how to do certain things. But yeah, and then also would be like webbing on webbing, right? So you sew a webbing square down, and then you have to sew webbing, like a looped webbing, on top of webbing. That can be challenging. Oh, let's add another dimension to it. So then put foam underneath. So belts and straps, right? So you've got 3D mesh, and then you've got a layer of foam. Then you have a layer of ultra, and then you have webbing on top of webbing. So it's a nice, like, big, like, sub sandwich, and you're sewing through that. That's pretty challenging. I think that's probably probably the most challenging products to teach somebody would be belts and straps.
Um, you talked about this a little bit earlier when you talked about bringing the mechanic in and having him talk about changing your needle and thread and stuff like that in the machine. But I'm really curious now that you mentioned something like that specifically. How do you teach, or can you say more about teaching thread tension and how to dial in these different stitches for different techniques?
Sure. And that's where we run into some challenges there, because you're in the accessories department, right? So you're making a stuff sack, which is like 0.55 ounces per square yard, Dyneema, and then you have to sew a multi-pack, which you go right over to your ultra fabric, right? How is your machine gonna respond to that? I've been around for a while, so I I'm pretty good at setting my machine to a point where there's a pretty good spectrum of what I can sew. But for newbies, that can be a little tough. So during the presentation, I have slides, or Alan and I, have slides that show exactly what to look for, right? So I call them people heads, right? When you see the little people heads popping out and they're coming up through, that's when your needle tension probably is a little too much and your bobbin's not enough, right? But if you turn the fabric over and you see your people heads there, well then, so we show them how to adjust the needle tension, and then of course how to adjust the bobbin tension depending on how the stitching looks. But again, when you're new, I don't know what stitching looks like. So another thing I like to tell them is, if you're looking at it and it just looks okay, but you're not really sure, is put the fabric down on the table, take your seam ripper, and see if you can move the stitch. Go to a particular stitch and see if you can wiggle it side to side. If you can wiggle that stitch, you probably need a little bit more tension, right? You need to do a few more clicks and get it so when you take it with the seam ripper, because obviously the first way you're going to tell is the fabric scrunching up? Well, then you know you have a problem, right? But if it's not scrunching up and it still just doesn't seem right, or you want to know, take your seam ripper, try to wiggle that stitch. If you can wiggle it, you probably need a little more tension, right? And yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things, is trying to dial in, because let's be honest, there's a happy medium, where you have your needle tension and you have your bobbin tension, right? So on the machines that we use, when you crank up your needle tension, right? And then obviously you put your presser foot down. I always put the presser foot down and I tell them, they see me do it. I grab the thread and I pull. And I can just tell, depending on the gauge of the needle that's in there, the bend of the needle and how much I'm pulling, if it's good or not. But again, that's 5 years in. You go down underneath and you go to the hook area, you take your bobbin case out. When you pull that thread from the bobbin case, it's nowhere near the tension of the needle thread, right? So it's hard to tell somebody that the needle thread and the bobbin thread tension have to match. They shouldn't match. So what do you say? Well, but they should be in some sort of, I don't know, 80-20, right? The 80% pull here should be 20 there. Oh yeah, that works great. So really, it's just look at your stitching. Look at your stitching. Do you see looseness? Do you see people heads, as I say? Can you move it with the seam ripper? But I really would like to maybe look into maybe a device where it would actually take that needle thread and maybe pull it. I don't know, what would they do? Inch pounds or whatever. And you get like a readout. And then you would take your bobbin and you get a readout, right? And then like if the needle is at 5 when you're sewing Ventum, then the bobbin tension should be at a 2, right? So again, it can never be equal, but maybe there's a magic number that would help newbies out to determine where they need to be. And then we could say, okay, when you're on Ultra, it should be an 8-5, right? Again, that's just my crazy brain at work.
Yeah, no, that would be really cool. I think that would be such a fascinating like chart to see, to sort of see what these two numbers, like what the delta of these two numbers would be based on the weight, and kind of like this sort of charting of that. That would be really, really cool to find out and see. I can only imagine what that would entail, but that'd be fantastic. Even just to have, because like I know exactly what you're talking. You say like you can kind of pull the thread, you can see the bend, you can feel it. You're like, that's pretty tight. But if there was some metric behind, like call that it's needle's really bending, that's an 8,
right?
Like, even give or take, that would give so much like a more concrete picture for people. I interrupted Avery because she was about to ask a question,
Sure.
but I had one other follow-up. There's something I'm curious about, another attribute that you haven't talked about yet, but I'm wondering if this is an attribute that you see in successful sewers. But I'm also curious about the prevalence of humility in people that are doing that, because I feel like there are so many things to sewing, for like to be able to sew something, to stop and look, to then kind of pull up your stitches and be like, how can I dial this in more? Is humility something that you see a lot of? Do you actually really not see it too much because of other things? I'm just sort of curious. For me, it would take some humility to make sure I was doing all these things. I was not getting discouraged when I do mess it up, and am able to kind of look with a critical eye and say, like, is this something that I want to sell, and how do I make that better? That would require some kind of checking of myself to do that.
Yeah, check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? Yes. And I want to say that that's a big part of my job, right? Is again, here I go with the spectrum, right? Overusing it. But you have people that have maybe, can you ever have too much humility? Yeah, probably. So they have too much, right? Oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do this, and da, da, da. And then you have the other side of the coin. Well, I don't see the problem. I don't see why that's a problem, and that's good, right? And then you have most people will fall in the in between, right? So yes, I think you do need, and it is good to have humility, because I've seen people walk away from the position because they didn't. Their whole lives, they've been able to pick stuff up, back to the pizza box building analogy, right? Quickly. Whether it was in high school or here or there, they're always top of the game. They're taught a new thing, and they're better than everybody else, at that thing within a few hours or a few days. Then they come in here, and this kicks their butt, and they just can't get over it. There's only so much I can do. I'd like to say I'm good at it, right? That's part of my job, is to say, wait a minute, I was just like you. I, was cursing the dry bag that I couldn't put the Velcro on, and I was about to. I mean, how do you think? How do you think I felt? I didn't just have to sew. I was supposed to. I train people how to sew, and I felt just like you. And through analogies and helping them out, and obviously, a lot of times it's just sitting down with them, right? Jumping in. Here's your problem, or let's do this. You can get through that. But a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but some of the times you just have those people that are, on the humility spectrum, they're don't exhibit enough, and they just say, well, oh well. And it's too bad, because sometimes you lose people like that who they were going to be good. They were going to be really good. They just couldn't get over themselves, right? Then you have the overly, right? I don't know if I can do this, that, the other thing. I'm a lot better with them. I I I like I like it in a way, right? I don't know if it can ever be too much for me when you have too much, because I I I can boost you up, and I can show you the small victories, and that's the biggest thing. Is no matter what you're doing, I don't care if you're sewing a product or whatever, baby steps, right? Let's get through this one stitch. That looks great. It looks really good. Let's get through the next stitch. And they always blame me for, oh, you're just saying that. You're you're just saying that. You're saying that to be nice. No, I'm not just saying that, because you know what? When this product goes to our quality control department and they look at it and it fails, if it fails and it comes back, I'm going to eat my words, right? And then I'll have to buy you a Coke or something, right? So if I say it's good, it's good. Because I'm going to tell you this too. I try to pride myself on maybe looking at it a little deeper even, right? Because obviously in any industry you have a spec tolerance. There's a certain window you want to be in when you're building stuff, when you're doing your stitching. I try to teach exact, right? When you first come in, this is the way it needs to be done. I try not to flirt with the spec tolerance, because I don't want you flirting with spec tolerance right off the bat. If you strive for perfection, you should be okay. So those with humility, I enjoy. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, based on what you said, I think that there would probably be a really important balance of resilience or tenacity and humility.
Right.
I think, yeah, you really got to thread the needle, pun entirely intended, for both of those to use a critical eye to really be critical of yourself, but not critical to be detrimental, but be critical to be refining your technique, I guess.
And I want to say this too. No matter if you're, production sewing or you're DIY making your own gear, take a break. I tell them this all the time. I know, and it's tough too when it's your job, but you're sitting for 4 hours. You make one mistake. All right, I'm going to fix that. Oh no. Here's another one. especially when you're here and you know you're going to be here for 8 hours. You can't just say, oh, I'll just finish that tomorrow. No, you have to finish that today, right? So it's only going to get worse. Again, analogy. You're playing a video game, and you're playing the video game and you're doing really well for the first hour or two. All of a sudden, you start dying, right? Your character dies, your character dies, your character dies. It doesn't get any better, right? You get up, you put the controller down, you go to the fridge, you have a snack, drink some water, some Coke, whatever. You sit back down. All of a sudden, you're good again. It's all in your head. So the same thing happens here. If you're having a bad time with a certain product and you keep trying it and you just keep making mistakes and you're getting frustrated, get up, go to the break room, get a snack, go outside, walk around, refresh, come back in, sit down, and things are a little different. If you don't want to take a break because you don't feel like taking a break, you want to hit your hours, well, then you know what? Stop. Clean up your area. Put your binding tape over here, do this, put your chair up a little bit, maybe wipe some stuff down, and just do something completely different, and then go back at it. Or ask somebody, ask me, ask your line lead or whatnot for some help. But taking a break goes a long way. And here's another thing. When you're in the zone, stay in the zone. If you're just on, and again, whether you're production sewing, you're at your house, and you're just feeling it, keep going, right? Because it's a roller coaster. Right? You're going to have your good days, your bad days, your good hours, your bad hours. If you're in the zone, stay in the zone, right? If you got to go to the restroom, of course, go to the restroom. But again, another one of my analogies, I tell them, I'm at the roulette wheel and I'm just calling numbers, right? Red, black, even, odd. And I've been there for about 2 hours and the money's just coming in. True story. And the money's just coming in, And I'm like, man, this is great. I'm going to go get a drink. So I leave the roulette wheel and I go get a drink, and maybe I get a little snack. I come back to the roulette wheel, and what happens? I start losing, like big time. The dealer, and I don't know if that's what you call a roulette person, the dealer, but comes over, looks at me, and says, "You should have never left." And I said, "What?" He goes, "You were on a roll. You don't ever leave the roulette table when you were doing what you were doing." And I went, "Oh." So same thing. If you're having a great day and your productivity's way up and you're making all kinds of product and nothing can stop you, don't stop. Because tomorrow you might come in and have a crummy day. You just made up for it with the good day, right? So stay in the zone when you're in the zone, and when you get out of the zone, you can't get the zone going, take a break.
I gotta say, I love all of your analogies. That one's gonna sit with me for a while. And I think that's great advice because you can get so, you know, pigeonholed in what you're doing and making mistakes, and then you just start making more. It's like that's how I feel about when I'm hiking and I start like tripping over roots, and then I just keep tripping over more roots. I'm like, man, I'm tired. Maybe I should sit down and eat something.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people will relate to that. Let's talk about the juicy part of the Zpacks sewing department. What types of sewing machines do you all have?
Well, we have a variety. From sergers. I mean, we have Bartax. We have I was going to say your regular industrial types, and I don't know, probably at least 6 or 7 different types. I can't get into the models of each and all, but some will go faster than others, and some are good for kind of starting out, and then certain departments use certain different machines as well because of the fabric or the speed in which you can do things. Obviously, you can sew straight running stitches a lot faster than doing like a backpack back, so it requires a little different machine.
Awesome. I have one more question about that since we've been talking about the lovely people at Zpacks in the sewing department. Give us an idea of scale in terms of how many people are sewing every day.
Oh, at least sewing. Gee, I don't know.
Yeah, or involved in the process, involved in that making
Involved
process.
100 or
Oh,
so.
wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Because I'm sure there's some people who do specific tasks, and that task might not be sewing specifically, right?
Oh,
But
sure. Yeah.
yeah, 100. Okay, amazing.
Yeah. We have.
I don't know. I was like thinking, around that number, but 100 people, I was, yeah, thinking about like, I was trying to picture in my mind, like what the room looked like and the stations and how the machines were set up, and things like that. So, yeah, thanks for telling us and kind of painting that picture just in general about, how the trainees go through this sewing trail map and their day to day and the process. I think it's really enlightening and I've enjoyed listening to it, and especially as an outsider and just a regular DIYer, because I'm like, oh, it'd be so cool to be in that sewing machine course where you're teaching about like how to repair certain things, and I would just like love to be a fly on the wall and sit through that. And I'm sure there are so many others listening as well who would also benefit and love to be a fly on the wall as well.
Yeah. I tell people a lot, give me a week. Give me a week. And you touched on something I wanted to touch on too, and that's mistakes, right? Mistakes. That's a huge part of training that nobody really thinks about. I don't either. I do it all the time, make mistakes. I'm kidding, but I'm not. But we all make mistakes. When they come in, I tell them, I said, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just don't screw up. I'm kidding. I say, don't be afraid to make mistakes, right? Because that's how we learn. I mean, that's obviously cliche and overused, but boy, how true it is. So not only do I have to teach you how to make a product to perfection, so it'll pass quality control, but it's my responsibility, and not just me, of course, your line leads, your supervisors play a part too, and showing you how to fix things properly so that they will get back to where they need to be to pass quality control. So, I mean, it's almost like a 30-60, right? 30% of the time is spent showing people, well, this is what you did, but this is how you do it. I mean, how do you sometimes you have, like I said, the little people heads, right? The loose stitching. One might just say, oh, I'll just take the seam ripper. Okay, but we're working with Dyneema here, right? We can't have holes in that. It's called a dry bag for a reason, right? So you take your seam ripper, you turn it, get to the dull side. And if it's not too bad, or even if it's a lot, you can take it and you can lift each one like that. And then or how to properly, if you have a stitch, right, that leads to nowhere, right? It's like a highway and and you're like, oh no, what do I do? Well, there's a certain way you have to fix that properly so it'll stay rigid and tight. I mean, you can't just go to where you just left off and just start sewing again. Now you've got two ends that are going to come loose. You've got to go back a certain amount. You've got to lock that up, go over your stitching, and continue on. So all this needs to be taught. And there was something else you said. Speaking of what you said, Avery, I actually had a hard time trying to find somewhere to go for the podcast because everywhere I went, it was loud. You could just hear machines going, right? And I tried this. Yeah, I tried an office over there, and I said, "Well, that'll be actually kind of cool," but I said, "But it might disrupt the audio."
Rob, we put you through the gauntlet of questions today, and you've handled it amazingly. So we're down to the last two.
Okay.
My second to last question is more so just about Zpacks. I mean, the way that you've been able to talk about them, I think everyone listening probably knows who they are. Everyone we talk to and he listens from us is really involved in the cottage gear and post cottage gear, what we call kind of companies that have branded. Anyway, everyone knows who you are. But they've probably gotten a different perspective of who you are in the back end today. Is there something else that you would want people to know about Zpacks that they may not know just from social media and your website?
Yeah, I do. So not only do we teach, and I say we because it's not just me, I am the training manager, but pride in what you're doing, right? So you're here in West Melbourne, Florida, right? You got out of bed, you came in, you sat down at a sewing machine. That backpack, that shelter, that dry bag, that stuff sack, that could be out on the trail tomorrow, the next day, or the next day, right? If you don't secure that ladder lock with binding tape that the guy line goes into secure enough, that shelter could be up, halfway up a mountain over in the Rockies, and then it pops loose at 2 a.m., right? We need to think about this kind of stuff, and we do instill, and I try to instill pride and quality. And I can see it because when I sit with the sewing machine operators and, they're doing certain things, they take that extra time and make that extra effort to make sure that everything is the way it should be. I also try my best, and others as well. If I'm teaching you a food bag, right? Because most people that come in here, they're not ultralight hikers, right? They don't know about gear and all. And I have plenty of other stories and analogies to hit home so that they understand what they're doing. But I was teaching food bags just the other day, and I sat down with some folks that had never done a food bag. And I said, then you do this, then you do this, and you put the carabiner on it. And I said, do you know what this is for? No. And then I explained to him what it is. I said, if you can feel it, this is much thicker Dyneema, right? 2 ounces per square yard or so than our regular dry bag. So it's basically a dry bag. Don't let the name food bag scare you. It's a dry bag, food bag. I said, but it's specifically designed to hold food. And then you're sewing an extra piece of binding tape on at the female buckle, and you're using an X stitch or hourglass instead of a Z, because it's not going to just be used to clasp the bag together, but it's going to have a carabiner on it. And you put the carabiner on it so you can, put your cord or twine or rope through, put it up around, attach it to a rucksack, and keep it suspended up so that animals can't get at it. And I said, it also doubles as a bear piñata. So if you're lonely and you're kind of getting bored on the trail, I said, you just grab the rope as the bear's coming by, and you can grab it and you can go like this. I said, but just don't let them see you. Right. And they get a kick out of it, of course. But I try to explain to them what they're doing. And sometimes, if they're doing a component, right, they're sewing the back, somebody else is sewing the front of the backpack, someone else is doing the straps, and someone else does the final sew, right? There's a lot of hands that go in. Try to grab a backpack and say, hey, this is what you're making. And this is what this is for. This is why this has to be here. So I'd like people to know that it's not just, hey, just, sew. It's not that. It's take some pride in it. And we have, events where Mateo likes to show videos of our customers enjoying our products. And it really hits home. I think, we look at it and I say we never, but it's not every day you get to see, okay, what are our customers doing with our product? And like I said, the majority of the sewing machine operators and a lot of people here aren't ultralight hikers. So it tickles you a little bit to see, okay, this is what I'm doing. And it just instills that pride. So I want people to know that.
I love that. Yeah, that's really nice to see, especially in the e-commerce world. You can get a lot of information about a company, about their products and stuff, but the pride that's a harder thing to communicate over in a digital world. The last and final question. So we have kind of a flagship question that we ask people. I'm going to switch it up for you. The question normally for us is what fabric is missing in the industry or missing on the market. I don't want to ask you that. Not that you don't know a lot about fabric, but I want to ask maybe one that's more sewing related. So what sewing contraption, tool, or piece do you think is missing that would make teaching sewing at Zpacks easier?
Well, we've had quite a few we've tried out, but what is missing? And I always tell my trainees, liquid hole remover. That's the one. I'm kidding, of course.
Just a little bit of magic would be awesome, wouldn't it?
And that's one I use a lot when they're sewing the Dyneema, and whether we're using scrap or maybe it's a real product, and they make some holes, and I say, uh-oh, and they say, well, what do I do now? And I say, well, usually we use the liquid hole remover. I said, but I only have a tiny bit left, and I was waiting for a good time to use it. And of course they go, well, now's a good time. Now's a good time.
This is it. This is it.
You know what I want to say to that question is, because we've tried a lot, we use a lot, is not so much anything that's missing is, I guess to your audience, make sure you have the right tool for the job, and make sure it's functioning properly. And if it needs to be sharp, it's sharp, right? Sometimes I don't want to say you're only as good as your tools, of course, because that's not entirely true. But I mean, especially when it comes to production sewing, or maybe if you're at home too, when you have snips that you have to go like this 3 times, right? I call it the 3 times a charm snips, right? So you have to clip 3 times to actually clip the thread. You need some new snips, right? So maybe not just one particular tool that's that's missing. I could probably think of more funny ones, but maybe just make sure that all the tools you do have, maybe re-examine and make sure that they are what you like. I mean, we had these big seam rippers, which were good, and then we put another order in, I don't know, a while back, and we got some smaller ones, and they're kind of cool because they double as a brush, like a cleaning brush, and nobody was really like onto them. And then I was like, I started using it, and I was like, oh my God, these things are so cool because they're so small. They can really get in there on, when you're sewing Lycra. I don't know if you've ever tried to get Lycra off a webbing. You need some really small stuff. And I want to say too, to your audience, because, I obviously looked into what you guys do, and is when it comes to machines, I want to say too is I can't, like I said, I can't get too much into what makes and models we have, but keep it simple. I have a lot of trainees that come in, and because they start sewing here, they decide they're going to buy their own machine for the house. And I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, they come in and they start asking me questions about, there's a digital readout and it says this and this, but I don't know what this is and this. And I just keep thinking to myself, maybe, just maybe, go for the simplest one. You know what I mean? Or maybe buy like a secondhand one that doesn't have all that stuff for your first machine. And all this has probably been said before. Maybe I'm just reinforcing what you guys say, but that might be the way to go. And don't get too dejected, right? So it's very easy for me to say, oh, well, you're really dejected and you're not in the zone, but, do you want a paycheck or not, right? That's good motivation. Of course, I don't say that, but what I'm getting at, the metaphor, I guess you would say, is when you're at your house, you don't have somebody doing that. You don't have a coach, right? To say, it's almost like a trainer, right? When you go to the gym, some people, they don't go to the gym unless somebody's goes with them. So it is tough when you're at the house to say, okay, I want to carry on with this. Maybe you want to take some cues from what I said. Maybe you want to set a goal for yourself and say, okay, I want to finish this belt pouch or dry bag or hammock or whatever I'm making by Thursday, right? If that means I got to do it a little before dinner or when I get home from work, I want to finish it by then. Because I know my mom ran into that a lot too. She had like patterns laying around and she just some unfinished stuff. It's very easy to get dejected and throw your hands in the air, but set some goals for yourself. Get something that you're familiar with that's not going to confuse you, because if it confuses you and it's got all these things that you don't know about, you're probably not going to use it as much as you'd want to, and just stick with it.
I love it. Rob, thank you for being generous with your time and answering all these questions. This has been really cool. This is a killer episode, and it's just really awesome to hear about what you do. One other thing I was just going to say to you is that I can tell you work with a lot of passion. It's really cool as a podcast host, but also just, I don't know, as a fellow human. It's really cool to talk to people that do things that they're passionate about, that they're excited about, and they work really hard at. And I can see those things in you. So thank you for sharing a little bit of your passion, excitement about what you do with us and with our listeners. It's a gift. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.